Your Honor, Mr. Brennan, Ms. Sidley, Mr. McQuarrie, Ms. Scott, members of the jury. This tragedy was not born from wickedness. This tragedy was born from sickness. Scott was born with a mental illness, and it was born into his brain, not because he chose for it to be born into his brain. It chose to be born itself, into his brain. Scott, can you stand up, please? Can you come right here? You can stand right here, please. This is Scott Kologi. Okay, we've heard a lot of people throughout this trial talk about him as if he's not here. He's here. This is Scott. This is Jonathan's brother. This is Stephen's brother. This is Michelle's nephew. This is Richie's nephew. This is Grandma Carol's grandson. This is Scott Kologi, and he was born with a mental illness. Thank you, Scott. And Scott's family, they ignored his mental illness, mainly because of Mom, because she didn't want him to get taken away. We know that. And it wasn't out of a bad feeling or thought. She was doing it out of protection. She loved Scott. And she wanted to protect him from the bad things that can happen when people are stigmatized for mental health or are taken away. Why does he get taken away? So this family made a decision to ignore that mental illness. And because of the ignoring of that mental illness, this tragedy happened. Because Scott's mental illness was ignored, this tragedy happened. They want you to ignore it again. And if we ignore it again, another tragedy will happen to this family. And this family's had enough tragedy. My name is Rich Lomurro. I represent Scott Kologi. Mr. McQuarrie represents Scott Kologi. Scott Kologi is not bad. He is not evil. He's sick. He was sick then. He was sick when he was born. He's sick now. This is Scott's family. I've shown this picture a lot through this trial. This is just before this incident happened. They're at dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. This is Scott's family. And how do we know, how we learned through this trial that Scott was sick? We learned it from the people who knew Scott best, his family. Not 30,000 pages of documents and people who didn't know Scott, from his family. Stephen, Jonathan, Aunt Michelle and Uncle Richie, Grandma. That's who came here and told us about Scott. And it's a totality of the circumstances analysis, folks. This is not a screenshot of someone's life. This is not a screenshot of a family's life. This is a global experience, and we've heard it from the people who lived it. They say wickedness. That's this case. This case is irrational.
Can we go to sidebar, please?
Folks, I'm going to unplug this computer for a second and then plug back in. I'm sorry. It'll take just one moment. Come on, dude. Thank you. I'm sorry for that. I fixed it. We're back on. I'm going to rewind the slide so I can get us contextually where we were. We know that Scott had sickness, and we learned it from Scott's family. I went through all the family members. That's who we learned it from. Okay, let's get back into that. Sickness that was described by the family. Then, they say wickedness. And like I said, that's this case. They say wickedness, we say sickness. That's this case. Who told us about it? Employees of the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office, like Detective Kologi, the firearms expert, the crime scene. Those are all people who work for that office. That's who we heard from. They never knew this family. They don't know this family now. They never met Scott. They weren't there at the time. And if you notice my cross on those folks were pretty short because there's not much to talk about. After all, one thing's clear, we're not debating that this tragedy happened. Let's be very clear about that. It did happen, and Scott did shoot his family. And we've never tried to be dishonest with you about that. That happened. All this case is about is the mental state of Scott. And they spent 4 days on bullets and bodies and things that no one's disputing. We're not disputing. You see this gun here? That's the gun. Why are we focusing on it so much? Because they're ignoring the real issue. Who else did we rely on? Dr. Santina. Dr. Santina is a doctor here in New Jersey, right? She works here. She does work in this state. She treats sick patients and she does evaluations. You know, one thing that is bothersome is the implication that a treating psychiatrist is somehow sacrificed, or I should say, is somehow less equipped to do forensic evaluations because they treat sick people. And in this case, there's a implication that because Dr. Santina, who was chosen by the judge to do an evaluation of Scott, somehow had a bias. She was chosen by the judge. She did an evaluation of Scott. She didn't do therapy with him. She didn't get a medication. She didn't have this long-lasting treatment relationship that would have had her create some bias in her brain. She did an independent, court-ordered evaluation. And then, based on that evaluation, we hired her as our defense expert. By the way, they could have brought anybody they wanted in from this case. She was brought in to do a court evaluation for $1,200 for her evaluation the first time, and after that, then we used her as our expert. That's what we brought to you, the person who was in this case. After the court evaluation, she became an expert, not the other way around. She wasn't hired as an expert and then did the evaluation, like Dr. Dietz. She did an evaluation, and then we said, Dr. Santina was in this case from the judge, we'll take her. They say wickedness, who do they rely on? Could have used any doctor in this case, right here in this state. Anyone they wanted. And there was plenty. Had to go to California and spend $200,000 to bring to you Dr. Dietz. That's who they had to get. They couldn't get anybody on the East Coast. They had to go all the way to California. He's hired first, and then he does his evaluation. That's who they brought here. He hasn't treated a sick patient in 30 years, only does paid evaluations. I don't even say anything else about that. Not helping sick people for 30 years. All he does is paid evaluations. That's who they got. Make no mistake about it, folks. Dr. Dietz is a great storyteller. Right? He told us some good stories, but he is not a truth teller. We know it. His fake story in the Yates case put a woman on death row. But he paid his own way to get back and flew back to try and correct the record. It was too late. She was sentenced to death. His false testimony. A 3-judge panel threw that case out, sent it back. And what happened? She was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The court said Dr. Dietz's false testimony could have affected the judgment of the jury. The court said Dr. Dietz's false testimony affected the substantial rights of the appellant. That's a court that said Dr. Dietz's false testimony was an impacting force in resulting in that improper decision by that jury. He is a storyteller, not a truth teller. Remember when he was talking about how, this is on direct before I had an opportunity to talk to him, on direct, well, I focus my practice now on mass murders and serial killers. That's what I focus on. But then I pointed out that the last case he had worked on in December of 2021, just 2 months ago, was the Ghislaine Maxwell case in defense of a woman charged with trafficking underage girls to have sex with Jeffrey Epstein and other powerful people. Was he being honest with us then? How many pieces of silver did he get paid by Maxwell? That's not public money. That's his higher rate. Dr. Dietz, remember this
We've
clip?
had 20 years of mass murders, throughout which I have repeatedly told CNN and our other media, if you don't want to propagate more mass murders, don't start the story with sirens blaring. Don't have photographs of the killer. Don't make this 24/7 coverage.
Don't do that. And then I played a series of clips where he was the Iceman and the psychiatrist on HBO. All these other 4 clips of things that he's done, documentaries, TV series, highlighting body count, the killer. Then he said to me, oh, but those weren't in the first 24 hours. And lucky for this guy, my next clip was...
Cases in the US is in Newport Beach in California now. Doctor, very good to talk to you. Well, you know the figures, I'm sure. More than 270 mass shootings in the US this year alone. I think on average more than 169 incidents of gun violence each day. This mass shooting, though, I think is unusual, isn't it?
It's unprecedented in the body count. This is the worst mass murder in modern U.S. history.
Unprecedented body count within 24 hours. But don't do it. Do as I say, don't do as I do, right? Let's get back to who told us, who came to source, who knew Scott, the family. What did the family tell us about growing up in the Kologi household? And this is universally accepted. The most loving family you could imagine. I mean, I think it's like Full House, right? They got in the basement, the aunt and uncle, all relatives are always there. This is a house filled with love. That's what this was. Board games, backyard hoops, meals together. Never missed holidays and birthdays together. Even after Jonathan moved out, what did he say? I'm back there on holidays. I'm back there on birthdays. I'm back there whenever I can to see my family. Family was everything. We also learned from a young age it was obvious that Scott had significant mental illness. They thought it was a brain tumor. And that's another reason that the problem was ignored. It wasn't just ignored because mom was concerned that Scott might get taken away. They were ignoring it because they thought there was nothing you could do about it. It was an inoperable brain tumor. And they operated under that concept for 16 years. So there was this lost opportunity to maybe get Scott treatment because they thought it was something that it wasn't. But that was what they believed. That's what this family believed. So they tolerated and kind of coddled Scott, even though he was significantly delayed. And what did we learn from his brothers? That it got worse as he got older. When he was at 15, it seemed like he was an 8-year-old. I think that's what Stephen said, you'll recall, or Scott said, Jonathan said, you'll recall that. The gap between normal age and Scott widened. Stephen actually said that when he would meet children the same age as Scott, he would be kind of knocked off of his barometer for what the appropriate matureness was for that age, because he thought Scott was the appropriate matureness. Then he would meet someone else and he'd say, wow. 16-year-old Scott, the family took care of Scott but continued to ignore the sickness. Now we're through childhood and we're up to age 16. That's when things really start to become most relevant for this case, because that's when things start to get bad. But the family, especially his siblings, they continue to let Scott hang around and continue to make him feel special. Even though he believes in Santa Claus, at 16, as a junior in high school, sure, he tells his counselor, I'm getting bored with the holidays, because he's embarrassed. He's 16 years old and believes in Santa. He's not going to tell his counselor, I just can't wait till I get to open presents for Santa Claus this year. But his family says he believes. And they're the ones who know best. He couldn't make change for $1. At 16. Siblings made Scott feel special. And the best example is his brother Stephen, all the way to the right, buys him trophies to make him feel special. We heard from Jonathan, family was the most important thing in the world. That should be thing, not thing.
That is the back of the house and a basketball court.
What did that backyard space and the basketball hoop mean to your family growing up?
It was our family area. It was a place where we all got together and bonded.
Who used to shoot hoops in the backyard?
It would be my father, my brother Stephen, myself, Scott, and other friends of the family.
Why was that time important?
This family is the most important thing in the world.
Family was the most important thing in the world. Family, that's who we belong.
Where does Scott sleep?
Perhaps more telling than anything else is the bed. The bed that Dr. Dietz, by the way, didn't even know what it was. The bed that Scott slept in with his parents at 16 years old. As a junior in high school, slept with his mom and dad.
Where does Scott sleep at night? With my parents.
Every single night?
Every single night.
This is before 2. Can you please tell the jury what you see in this picture, Jonathan?
I see my parents in Scott's bed.
Can you describe, and Your Honor, is it okay if he comes out of the witness chair point?
John,
Can you point to where each respective person in that bed slept? Your mother, your father, and Scott?
Would you like me to get up?
If you could, please.
Okay. Okay. My father would have slept here. Scott would have slept in the center, and my mother would have slept on the end of the bed.
Scott in the middle of the bed with his parents at 16 years old. We talked a lot about the Hawkswood School, and there was kind of 2 different versions that you heard about. You heard about the Hawkswood School, where this is a place that is for students with developmental disabilities, mental disabilities, autism, and a place that is not comparable to a regular high school. That's one version you heard. You also heard another version, which was that Scott was taking the park exam, he was flourishing there. Who's being honest about what this school is? The park exam wasn't even great. He flourished at a school where kids need to be taught about toileting and cutting their food in high school. This was in the IEP, Dr. Dietz, I talked about it. The things that they highlight for these students in their IEP is getting dressed themselves, using the toilet themselves, and using a knife and fork to cut food. Who's painting the picture of the real situation of this case, and who's painting it different? What did they tell us about the 16-year-old? They acted like he was the valedictorian of some sophisticated school. Misleading. Flourished at a school with kids with multiple disabilities. Is that really fair to say? Took the park exam that wasn't even graded. Yes, it was like a big deal when he told you that he took it, until I crossed him on it and said, well, what did he get on it? He got nothing on it, because it wasn't graded. It's exempt from it. Ignored the parts of the IEP, like Scott needing help, how to understand how much money to pay for items. That was part of Scott's career building, was to get him to go to a store with the correct amount of money to buy items. He was never going to be a psychologist. He was never going to be a horticulturist. That's a big story. Scott is not who they were painting him to be. "16-year-old Scott continued to take care of him despite his sickness. Mom got him dressed. Mom made him special meals. Mom loved Scott, and Scott loved Mom." Who got Scott dressed?
My mother.
Who made Scott's meals?
My mother.
Did Scott get different meals than the other family members?
Yes.
Why?
Because he had the palate of a child, my mother would cater to him specially.
How did Scott get, at 16 years old, how did he get places?
My mother would take him.
Did he take the bus?
No.
No one in the world was more important to Scott as he relied on Mom for all this. He loved. Let's talk about the family motto. The family motto was that we don't talk about mental illness. That was the motto, because they didn't want Scott to be taken away. It is a sad motto, but it would be unfair to say that this country hasn't had a motto similar to that. We're talking about it now, okay? Scott's mother told everyone not to mention it. Scott's mother told Scott not to mention it. He wanted to. Didn't want Scott to get taken away or put on medication. So we have to be in that moment and understand what was going on there. It was a young boy who couldn't talk about his issues, and a young boy who was told the rest of the family, we're not talking about him either. That's what was going on at that time. Why is this important? They're so critical about what Scott said to people before this happened, as if he wasn't a 16-year-old boy who was gullible, impressionable, autistic according to Dietz, schizophrenic according to Santina, and believed in Santa Claus and sleep with his parents at 16 years old. And they're critical about how he describes the awful thoughts he's having. Is that fair? One thing's clear is he's telling his family he can't control these thoughts. He's telling the grandpa and he's telling the mom, I can't control these bad thoughts. They're coming into my mind. He begs for help from both of them. The two people he can take it to that level of saying what's on his mind to. And both of them reject it. He wants to go to a therapist. He wants medication. And most of all, he wants the bad thoughts to stop. He doesn't desire these thoughts. These thoughts are going into his brain. How about the fake story of wickedness? We have 16 years of love. And what did Dr. Deach cherry pick out of 16 years and 30,000 documents, and not talking to a single family member himself, or talking to a single provider or a single teacher or anyone himself to get context to those 30,000 documents? What did they find? 83 pages of soap notes, 19 pages from a counselor, one text out of 5,000 pages, 13 hours of interview by Deach himself, including another hour and a half of the police interrogation. All that video sliced and diced and shown to you folks over 3 days. It was painful. They had 3.5 years to figure out how to put that together. $200,000 never, that's how much work, how much public money, as Deach puts it, $200,000 his firm billed. $200,000, never spoke to a single family member, never took the time to understand the family or Scott from the people who lived it. Boxes of documents. How about the fake story of anger? A bathtub at 3 years old that Scott doesn't even know if it happened or not? A random one-time fight that his mom and dad might have had? Bullying that happened 6 years earlier? It's easy to pick and choose these things out of 16 years and throw it and say, oh yeah, he wanted to be a tough guy and avenge this awful experience he had. It's not true. That's a fake story. The fake tough guy story. Ignored. There's not a single person who said that Scott had a violent tendency. They picked out these little odd ends where he was joking, and everybody knew he was joking. Even Raffaella, who's not a member of the family, said he was joking. And who experienced this awful tragedy, she still says, yeah, Scott was joking. It was obvious. They ignored that he wore costumes all the time, made a leather jacket into something it wasn't. That's a theme in this case, folks. It's misleading and putting a different spin on evidence to mean something that it clearly did. The Chuck Norris example was ridiculous. Chuck Norris and Arnold Schwarzenegger. In the same line, he said that his mother and uncle were also people who he looked up to. And he said it was because they were cool, funny, and strong, not because they were tough. It's a 16-year-old saying he likes actors in movies. And in the next sentence saying his mom and his uncle. And no offense to Uncle Richie, but he is not strong. Another example of then he's spinning the one-time statement into something it wasn't. That's a repeating theme. Spinning a text message, spinning one slice of a sentence from 20,000 or 30,000 pages of documents, slicing it into something that it's not. New Year's Eve, 2017. Scott has gone through a year of bad thoughts progressively getting worse. He has been for help. They're in his brain, he can't get them out. He's not getting help. He's not getting a psychiatrist or a psychologist to help him sort these problems out. They're getting progressively worse. He is out of control with his thoughts. His mental illness has taken control. It has been developing since he was born, and it is in full force on New Year's Eve, 2017. Scott wakes up in bed with mom and dad, and he's feeling off. He hears a voice in the shower. That was the topic of a big debate by Dr. Deach. Dr. Deach, again, critical of a 16-year-old boy who's interrogated 2 hours after a tragedy. Scott recalls a voice in the shower. He opened the blind. He looked around to see if anyone was there. No one was there. It's one of many examples of Scott seeing things that aren't there. We'll see it together in a few minutes. And we saw it before. He had bad thoughts all that day. He couldn't stop them. That's when they said that there was different parts of dissociation throughout the day. Scott was experiencing the thoughts coming into his brain and then leaving, and coming into his brain and then leaving. And that's how this works. That's how schizophrenia works. Scott tried to ignore them, but he couldn't. What was going on with everyone else that day? It was a normal, happy day. That's what we've heard from everyone. Even Jonathan came by earlier that day. Everyone saw Scott, nothing out of the ordinary. And they were all there all day. Let's talk about the missing 4 hours that we've talked to you about. From 7:30 to 11:30. when the family had dinner. Scott was eating chicken. They watched King Kong as a family in the family room. We've told you about that. That whole part of the night is missing from their case. It's as if you went into a room, watched a ridiculous Japanese cartoon theme song, went upstairs and decided to massacre everyone with wickedness in his heart. That is a false story. That is a fake story. The true story is that Scott struggled all day with bad thoughts, tried as hard as he could to not succumb to what they were telling him to do, tried to be as normal as possible, went and watched this movie with his family. And they skipped over those 4 hours. And they watched King Kong until 11:30. That's what really happened. Everybody was saying, by the way, if they're all in the living room watching King Kong together, the entire family, all of them, Scott could have gone to the bathroom and done this wicked act at that point when they're all together in the living room watching King Kong. But he didn't, because there was no plan to do this wicked act. The movie ends at 11:30. Everyone splits up in different parts of the house. Scott talks to Mom about his school project, about floral arrangement. He's going to do a presentation. And Mom says, go practice, and we'll present after the ball drops when everybody's kind of just hanging out. And Scott says, okay, that sounds good. So he takes his backpack and goes upstairs. And what's in his backpack? His homework. Pencils. Proof that he was going to do exactly that. After he's done working on his school project, he turns the light out to go downstairs, and this is when everything changes. This is when the demons of schizophrenia take Scott's brain over, and he loses himself and becomes a part of a world that isn't real. This is when it happens. He sees a ball of light outside the window, and guess what, folks? That ball of light wasn't there to the rest of us, but it was there, Scott. The bad thoughts begin to infect his brain, and he cannot stop it, and this is in full force. There's no more slices of bad thoughts. He is going to be killed. He's going to be killed. And he loses reality. He enters a dissociative state. In a dissociative state, he arms himself and hides in the corner. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. You can drive a car in a dissociative state. Maybe you can drive a car on Mars, but you can drive a car. You can still do things. And he does arm himself. And by the way, nobody's debating that. We're not saying Scott didn't load the gun and Scott didn't shoot the gun. We're saying he was in a schizophrenic panic when it happened. That's the difference. The real-time evidence supports schizophrenia, not the fake story about some adrenaline-filled rage. There's nothing to support that theory. It's the complete opposite of that, actually. After Scott arms himself and is haunted by these thoughts that he can't control, he sits in the corner of the room. He doesn't burst down the door. He doesn't burst down the door and run downstairs and start shooting. He hides in the corner. So let's talk about misleading and dishonesty again. We've told you the truth and never hid from it, ever. We know that the gun was used. We know that the bullets were put in the gun. We know all that. We conceded. We didn't say a thing during that part. It's a different part of the case. When you go back into the jury deliberation room, you can just go ahead and push all that stuff to the side, because that's not the issue. Don't be fooled. Push it to the side. Never denied Scott loaded a gun. And let's talk about AK-47 type rifles. Why don't we leave them out? Because children can use them. This gun looks sophisticated. It's not sophisticated. It's popping batteries into a remote. It's a spring-loaded magazine. It's not hard. It's 3 steps. That's why we lock guns up. So kids can't get their hands on them and use them because they're that easy to operate. This is not a difficult tool. It's not difficult. Here's some of my favorites. The night vision goggles. So what? There's no proof Scott even touched them, ever. They were a part of a video game toy that Steven got, laying on his bed, with all the massive amounts of other things in the room. They have no relevance to this case whatsoever. The first 4 days of trial, I thought it was all about the goggles. Where'd they go after that? Deed says nothing about them. They're not in the backpack later. There's no evidence, not a single person can say Scott used them or had them in his possession at any point. All misleading information, implications, means nothing. Where'd the goggles go? The cartoon theme song. We don't know if Scott listened to it for 2 seconds, 20 seconds. We don't know if he was picking the next video. We have no idea. It was blasted in this courtroom 2 times full length. Why? To mislead you folks. It was played on an iPhone. We don't even know if it had volume on. We have no clue. It's a cartoon. They made it into something it's not, and they pushed it on you twice. Loud as they could play it. And that was done 4 hours before this incident. So this Japanese cartoon theme song they played to go get all pumped up to eat chicken and watch King Kong with his family. Misleading again. Dr. Dietz, $200,000 worth of misleading he did to us over 3 days. How many clips did we have to watch? How long did we have to sit and watch him clip? Think about the clips he didn't show you. All that time he was with Scott over 2 days, right? Conveniently picked the ones that supported his side. How about the game of telephone? That was great, right? Well, Scott told Grandpa, that told Steven, that told Mom that Scott's gonna kill everyone. No context. 0 context. Misleading, again. How about the leather jacket? They want you to think this is some type of tough guy thing, the leather jacket. Every single family member said Scott wore costumes. Here's Scott as the Blues Brothers on when? New Year's Eve, because he wore costumes on New Year's Eve. That was his thing. He had the exact same costume, that one. See that pumpkin in the background? It's Halloween. He had a tradition of wearing his Halloween outfit on New Year's Eve, and that's exactly what he did. But what did they do? They misled us to think that it was something other than that it was some type of tough guy thing that he wanted to do. No evidence to support that. And what did Richie tell us?
Was there anything out of the ordinary with Scott?
No.
During the course of that day, was there any arguments inside the home?
No.
Were people having a good time?
Yeah.
Do you remember what Scott was wearing on that day?
It was leather jacket.
Now, was it unusual for Scott to wear that jacket?
No, it was one of his favorite ones.
Was it
That's from the family. All right, people who knew Scott. Which family member told us that Scott put the jacket on to look tough and to go massacre people? Who told us that? No one. Because it was misleading and it was another fake story for Dietz. We now return to Scott hiding in the corner during this paranoid schizophrenic episode. He doesn't go hunt people in a rage, which is what Dietz wants you to believe, that he's going to go and adrenaline-filled hunt now. That doesn't happen. Scott doesn't go to anyone. Scott shoots the first person who comes upstairs. It wouldn't have mattered who it was. That's who was going to get shot because Scott was in a different world and he was going to be killed. Scott shoots the second person. It didn't matter who it was. It's the second person who got there. Now, you know how we know this is true? It doesn't matter what was said later when people are planting thoughts and sentences in people's mouths. It matters what happened at that exact moment. We know it's true because in the real world, Mom in the real world, Scott's best friend, and Scott relies on her for everything. He loves his mother. He loves her. He loves her. Mom in schizophrenia is not the mom who loves him and is coming to kill Scott. It's a different human being in his brain. It may be mom. He may be able to identify her as mom, but that's not what's going on inside of his brain, and it's the illness that is controlling his thoughts. Dad in the real world plays basketball, sleeps next to him in bed, loves him. This is the real-time evidence. That's who this person is that he's shooting. Dad in the schizophrenia is not the dad who loves him. It's coming to kill Scott. It's still dad. It's in a different world, and that world's being controlled by his mental illness. When Scott comes downstairs, he turns into the kitchen and continues to fire. If he turned the other way, probably would have been Steve or whoever was standing there. It was just the next person. Nothing saved Grandpa besides the dissociative state ending. Dr. Dietz, again, has this ability to tell us what happened when he wasn't there. Scott, sweep the gun past Grandpa. How does he know that? How does he know Grandpa wasn't behind something and that he didn't see Grandpa at that exact moment? This was seconds. It didn't matter who was there. The people were getting shot because Scott was not in control of his brain. And then he snaps out of dissociative state. He loved his mom as much as anyone else in the world, and he killed her first. So it doesn't make sense. That other theory doesn't make sense. The real-time evidence shows us schizophrenia. What happened when the dissociative state ended? Scott returns to reality, and he acts confused. He doesn't go run out the back door. He doesn't get overcome with emotion. He does nothing. And think about it, because I know there's like, oh, he was going to go have a big shootout with the police. Another complete made-up thing. Scott does nothing that could even remotely resemble that. If he wanted to, he could have laid the gun down, walked out the back door, and walked down the road. The police weren't there yet. Could have done anything he wanted to. That if he had done it, he would have said, this is evidence that he knew what he was doing. He went out the back door and tried to hide it. This was evidence he knew what he was doing. He got on the floor and started crying uncontrollably. You can't have it both ways, Dietz. The fact that he does nothing at all, he leaves the gun on the floor in the room in plain sight and takes his jacket off and leaves it there. No attempt whatsoever to hide anything. If this is someone who's got this great plan, they're not going to leave the murder weapon in the middle of the room that they're in. Just leaves it there. He makes no effort to hide anything or call for help or anything. He just sits there. His master plan is to get away with it, is to sit in a seat next to his dog. We went over the cartoon theme song, ridiculous. How about the Clue board game plastic gun? Both Michelle and Richie said it was a joke. But we had to listen to them go on and on about it. It was some projection of his plan to kill his family. It was a joke about a little 1-inch plastic gun from a Clue game. Ridiculous. Make-believe anxiety about school. They made a big deal about Scott getting anxious and having these issues about being transitioned back to Long Branch. In reality, from Scott's own text, it was an okay experience, just wasn't for him. They went back to Hawkswood. No big deal. Again, misleading. Make-believe anxiety about bullies. It was 6 years earlier. The reason it was brought up in those counseling sessions is because Scott was learning as a life skill how to deal with cognitive behavioral therapy and how to learn how to relax oneself when you're in a state that might agitate you. And it's a state that they chose to basically get you thinking about that fully. 6 years earlier. The adrenaline pumped up version, again, let's take the real-time evidence. Not a year later, not 2 hours later when the police are interrogating him, not 4 years later when he's finally sees him, 4 years later. Nothing was stopping police from going to see him at the beginning. Chose not to. Raffaella and Steven. Scott's calm, no emotion, didn't say anything. If he's on this big, adrenaline-filled, tough guy rampage, he's going to be showing emotion. Overcome with emotion. Breathless, he's going to be going at it. Nothing. Officer Richards, he spoke in a calm, quiet manner and didn't appear to be out of breath or anxious. That is the polar opposite of an adrenaline-filled killing spree that they want you to think happened. Scott's first reaction, before he's interrogated by the police at the police station, this is his first reaction. Said in a low, calm voice, I just don't know why. Before anyone prods him, before anyone probes him, that's his natural, says what happened. He doesn't know why. No one even asks him at this point. He just confuses everyone. It's not until 2 hours later, when they're pushing the agenda on him, that he makes up these answers. And that's consistent with dissociation, what we learned from Dr. Dietz. Remember he said in the Maxwell case, dissociation affected memory of the people who were accusing Jeffrey Epstein of sexual assault? That's what he said. So dissociation affects your memory, and you fill in the blanks later, after the fact. Let's talk about the police interrogation. Let's talk about it. And by the way, let's be crystal clear. The only ones who matter about this police interrogation are you. No one else. We didn't need to go through everyone else's impression of what happened out there. Only ones that matter are you. That's it. Take it back in the jury's room, play it again, and you decide. Not Tazi, not Deeds, no one else. You have just as good the ability to understand what's going on in this video as anyone else. And we have to think about the context. 16-year-old mentally ill boy who believes in Santa sleeps in bed with mom and dad, known to be gullible and suggestive his entire life. And this is evidence. This is what we know. Suffering from a dissociative state known for affecting short-term memory. That's that boy in that picture. That's what he's going through. That's who that boy is. The Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office detective uses leading language and suggestive answers. Just watch yourself. Many, many times Scott's trying to get an answer, he's working through it, he's rubbing his head, he's trying to get his thought out, and they interrupt him, and they plant their agenda into his mouth. Like I said, please throw everyone else's version out, it doesn't matter. You're the only one who matters. You're the only one. Deeds' conclusion, it was this video. That's what it was. All that stuff that happened in real time that we just talked about together, throws it out the window. He only cares about what Scott said 2 hours later in an interrogation room while suffering from dissociative state, being a 16-year-old boy who has mental disabilities. That's who he relies his entire opinion. Scot-free. Another ridiculous thing. We heard from Jonathan alone.
Mr. Lomurro. Thank you, Judge. Jonathan, what did you make out of this whole scot-free thing? What did you make out of it? Completely absurd, ridiculous. I didn't take it seriously at all. Why? Because it's absolutely insane. The fact that he said something like, or the fact that it was brought up, after all the things that had happened, your mom being killed, your father being killed, your sister being killed, your grandmother being killed, by Scott, this scot-free and other things that would be brought to your attention. After all that had happened, how did you believe them to me? That he had a complete disconnection with reality. No further questions.
That's from the family, the people who know Scott, not some spin by people who never knew him. They want to focus you on the disaster, and they want you to ignore the sickness. No one disputes that Scott caused these deaths, and the blood and the bullets in the bodies. Why? Why will they focus on that? Why? Because they want you to ignore the real issue. And I want to take a second right now. I don't get to talk again. This is it. This is it for me. This is it for Scott. I don't get to come up here again. Okay? So when the state is presenting their closing argument, just keep in mind to say, what would Rich say about that? And what would Rich say about that point? Is that really fair? Keep that in your mind. Because I don't get to talk again. You have to be the voice for Scott, for his family. It can't be me, I don't get up again. So just keep that in your mind. Examples of sickness, hallucinations. That was a big part of this case. I asked Dr. Dietz on cross yesterday, if you all recall. I said, in your report, do you remember who had documented a history of hallucinations? What doctors in this case? And what did he say? He said, Dr. Greenfield, yes. Dr. Komura, yes. Dr. Wilder-Willis, yes. Dr. Rushing, yes. Dr. Perrin, yes. Dr. Santina, yes. all documented a history of hallucinations. Who denies the history of hallucinations or downplays them as if they were something that we all experience when we go to sleep or wake up? Dr. Dietz. And only Dr. Dietz, no one else. How about Scott's vivid detail of hallucinations? A wall in Scott's room appeared to be red and figures of 3 people appeared. Not something any of us see every day, I assume. Figure of a dead woman in bed with him. The woman changed from normal to red, teeth became sharp, and eyes became red. These are details. And even Dietz himself said, well, he just said that I have hallucinations. You disregard that because it's not specific. These are specific details told over and over again. A ball of white light outside of the window. A metallic smell that continued. He blamed that on Scott's sweat. Transparent woman floating into the ceiling. I have not seen a transparent woman floating into the ceiling. That is not something that people who aren't having hallucinations see or experience. Ink figures on neighbor's roof. One of my favorites, Looney Tunes characters running outside. A World War II plane. All things Scott sees, and we know there are no Looney Tunes characters outside. There is no World War II plane, but Scott sees. That same morning, at 5 a.m., Grandpa, who didn't have a chance to talk to Scott, said he told me it was stuff on his wall outside of his bedroom window, and he said it was the devil. So obviously these things were brought up before this, and these hallucinations were explained to Grandpa, the only person besides Mom he could confide in. This is what I told you we watched together later. We saw together, all of us, we saw, and so did Dietz.
Have a nice day too. Maybe I'm in the building.
Morning. So I heard you talking through the door. What are you saying?
So, I thought you had stuff.
Amen?
Didn't somebody?
No, I was standing in the hallway, but I heard you talking.
First, I was just about myself to tell you something I forgot from yesterday, but then I heard somebody over there.
So there's something there?
Yeah, so they're just checking up on me. No, they just said everything's okay with me.
Ah,
You didn't walk by?
no,
But you?
I was in the hallway, but I wasn't talking.
There was no one in the hallway. There was Dietz in the hallway. And he saw the whole thing. He saw a hallucination. We saw a hallucination. And he denied it. Scott turned as if someone had called his name. He responded to someone who wasn't there. Physically was not there. This isn't self-talk. Self-talk is, wonder what I should get from the grocery store. Apples. That's not what this is. This is a hallucination. It's a sick boy who can't control his thoughts. Now I've gotten to the point where we're going to talk about the law in this case, and the judge is going to do a jury charge for you this afternoon. But I've just picked out a couple things that are important I want to highlight here. The first is that the law adopts a standard of its own as a test for criminal responsibility, a standard not always in harmony with the views of psychiatrists. The reason I say that is because insanity isn't a medical concept. If you'll recall, where did I put that book? This book. This was a book that we saw many times throughout this trial. It's the DSM-5, and it deals with medical treatment for mental health. There is no insanity in this book because it's not a medical term. It's not something doctors can prescribe or diagnose. It is not a medical condition. It is a legal concept. The only ones who decide if Scott was insane or not are you. That's it. And you do it based on what you have seen and experienced in the evidence in this case. Throw everyone else out. Doesn't matter what they think. Only matters what you think. The judge will read to you this. Our society and our law recognize that some people may be bad and some people may be sick. A hostile act, that is, an illegal act, may in one case spring from wickedness and in another case from some infirmity or sickness of the mind, which an individual did not design. It is society's moral judgment recognized by our law that a forbidden act should not be punished criminally unless done with a knowledge of wrongdoing. For you to decide. Those are the scales of justice. They sit at rest equally. This case, insanity, the defense that we presented for Scott, has to be proven by what's known as a preponderance of the evidence. That means just more likely than not. I just think the little is bigger. That's all it takes. It is not the highest standard in our justice system, reasonable doubt. That is not what the standard is. It is not clear and convincing evidence. It is not the standard in this case. The standard in this case is preponderance of the evidence. If it is more believable than not that Scott was sick and suffered from mental illness, then he is insane. If it's less likely, then it is not. That's what this case is about. Here is the question for you to decide. This is it. This is the question. The defendant was laboring under such defect of reason from disease or mind as to not know, and it's a two-part test. That's why I circled or there. It's an or, not an and. You don't have to meet both of those things. You just have to meet one to qualify as insane. Disease of mind as to not know the nature and quality of the act, or if the defendant did know that he or she did not know that what he or she was doing was wrong. That's the test. Was Scott suffering from a mental disease or defect at any time of the shooting? This is the easiest question for you to answer. Everyone agrees that he had a dissociative state, which is recognized in the DSM-5. On top of that, Dr. Santina diagnoses him as having schizophrenia, and Dr. Dietz has him as autistic. So, prong one is met. He has a mental defect or disease according to this book. That's satisfied. The only debate about the dissociative episode is when it began. That's the debate. The debate is whether did this dissociative experience get brought on by the paranoid schizophrenia, the thought that Scott couldn't defeat his brain that was taking control of him? When he starts, he has a hallucination, and then he has this overwhelming feeling that he's going to be killed that he can't suppress. Did it start then? Or Dr. Dietz says it started when the first shot was fired. Either way, there's a dissociative state occurring. Dr. Santina says it occurred before arming. Dr. Dietz says it occurred after arming. The second prong, because of his mental illness, Scott did not understand the nature or quality of his actions, or, like I said, not and, or, because of his mental sickness, Scott could not understand the wrongfulness of his actions at the time. If you find one of them, you have to check not guilty by reason of insanity for all charges. Let's listen to what Dr. Santina said about this.
He was becoming more and more overtaken by the mental illness, in my professional opinion. He described, as I said, he described that voice in the morning. He described feeling like he wasn't himself. He described he had reported seeing this white light in the evening, and that he was beginning to isolate. He was having these disturbing thoughts that he experienced as not that they were coming from another being, but he was like, why are these thoughts coming to me? He was drifting in and out of it. I don't have it, there's no reason to fear my family, and then being immersed in a feeling that they were going to hurt him. So what I saw there was the gradual losing of himself into the symptoms of the mental illness, the psychotic symptoms.
That's the New Jersey doctor. That's Dr. Santina. Dr. Santina, again, explaining her findings.
The thought process, the fragmentation that occurs within a mental illness, within a psychotic state. He had said in other words at other times, it felt it was not me. I knew that my body was doing it, but it was not me. This again is a dissociative state. A person in a dissociative state can engage in organized behavior, even though their mental state is disorganized. People drive a car. People in a fugue state, which is a prolonged dissociative state, people will look at them and think that they're acting normally, even though their mind is not processing. So he was capable of doing these things. He actually described, I think very cogently, what was happening to him, where these delusionized ideas, the mental detachment were taking over, in spite of the fact that that was not what he wanted to be happening. He was losing himself in it.
Dr. Santina.
He was losing himself. And this is a 16-year-old boy who has mental disabilities, who sleeps with mom and dad in bed, who believes in Santa Claus. They want you to think that he's some mastermind who understands psychology and created himself. What's more likely? That he's able to describe this dissociative state because it occurred, or he's able to describe it perfectly at 16, mentally disabled. Dr. Santina.
Remove the picture, please.
Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are not to consider any pictures that are not in evidence. That picture is not in evidence and should not have been put before you.
Pictures removed.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Dr. Santina, she specifically addresses the second prong of the insanity charge in her professional opinion. And remember, this is the doctor that the judge chose in this case. The judge brought her in.
It's my professional opinion, again, to a reasonable degree, psychological certainty, that Scott Kologi was not capable of understanding the nature of his actions, or to appreciate their wrongfulness at the time that he was engaging in the offense.
And it is an or test. She has them both. And this is from Dr. Santina, the New Jersey doctor, who was in this case back in 2019. When you get your jury verdict sheet, it's long, but it's not as complicated as it seems. The question is only this. That's it for each and every person. And the answer is not guilty by reason of insanity for the reasons that we've gone over together. The judge will also give you a charge that says a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity does not necessarily mean that the defendant will be free or that the individual will be indefinitely committed to a mental institution. Under our law, if you find the defendant not guilty by reason of insanity, it will then be for the court to conduct a further hearing and, among other matters, determine whether or not the defendant's insanity continues to present and whether the defendant poses a danger to the community or to himself, herself. The resolution of those issues will ultimately determine what appropriate restrictions need to be placed on the defendant. Thus, procedures exist to adequately provide for the defendant and protect the public in the event the defendant is found not guilty by reason of insanity. I want to finish, I'm done. I want to finish where we started. That this tragedy was born out of a sickness This tragedy was not born out of wickedness. And we rely on that conclusion not from doctors, not from records, not from any other source other than the people who knew Scott best, his family, who all still love Scott, who all stand behind Scott, who know he was sick and didn't understand that night. If they didn't know that, they wouldn't be standing with Scott and still saying they love him. They know best. Family knows best.
So your understanding is that Scott had a loving relationship with everyone, Scott,
Everyone,
and you love Scott.
absolutely.
You still love Scott.
Still, yes.
To this day.
Wish I could take him home.
Wish I could take him home. And Michelle.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to point out that picture is not in evidence. It's been shown now 3 times. It should have been removed. Unfortunately, it was not. But you are not to consider that picture in any regard, because that is not a part of the evidence in this case. The words that are being said, that was something that's been played, that's fine, but that picture is not in evidence. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Lomurro.
Thanks, Judge. I should just say that you saw all the people whose pictures I've removed, you saw, so you know who they are. I was trying to make a visual aid, but you understand.
Do
Great.
you have any children?
I had one son.
And one, your son Stephen?
Yes.
Her only son. Scott killed her only son. And she was here on behalf of Scott.
I learned about those who are departed.
What did you learn?
Those the family members who are departed. That's what I learned.
Who was departed? If you can go close to the microphone, please. Who did you learn was departed?
My mother, my father, my sister, and my grandmother.
That's Jonathan. He lost everyone. Where was he? On that witness stand, she knows that his brother didn't understand what he was doing. And he stands in his corner. This is 2 hours after the incident. And this is his other brother's key. Oh, I'm sorry. Turn that down.
You're taking away. You're taking away.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
He gives him a hug, a loving brother. He gives him a hug after he's killed his mother, his father, his sister, and his grandmother. He gives him a hug. After that, this was Stephen and what happened, and you saw it. Your mom, your dad, your sister, and your grandmother were gone. You were still not mad at Scott, is that right?
Correct.
And you said it didn't seem that he emotionally understood what he did, is that right?
Yes.
This is the last clip, folks, and this is the strongest and most compelling clip, because this tells the whole story. After the incident, this is when I asked him in court. I'm going to show you the next clip. After the incident occurred, about 2 hours afterward, they go together. You saw your brother Scott, right?
Yes.
And when you saw your brother Scott, you gave him a hug,
Yes.
and you told him you loved him.
Yes.
And told him your mom and your dad loved him still.
Yes.
And you told him that you got his back.
Yes.
And you took his head close to your head. And you said, come on, buddy, I love him. Is that right?
Yes.
everyone still loves you. Your mom and dad, everyone. Don't worry about it, okay?
Yeah.
Just tell these guys everything. And you know I got your back.
I know.
Look at me.
I know.
Fuck, read it.
Yeah.
Fuck, right? What's going on? My water anymore?
Everyone still loves you. Mom, dad, everyone. That's Scott Kologi. Scott, can you stand up for a second? You don't have to come over, you can stand right there, Scott. That's Scott Kologi. He's Stephen's brother, he's Jonathan's brother, he's Uncle Richie's nephew, he's Aunt Michelle's nephew, he's Grandma's grandson. And he was born with a mental illness. And this tragedy did not happen because of wickedness. This tragedy happened because of sickness. It's up to you folks to finally recognize that sickness so another tragedy could not.